You want to build a mobile app in 2024 with a cross-platform framework, but you don't know if you should use Flutter or React Native? Let me help you make a decision based on facts, not feelings. Each framework has its own pros and cons, and the truth is, you can build great apps with both. So we need to dive more into differences in specific categories and nuances that separate Flutter and React Native. Throughout this video, you will better understand where each approach shines or falls short, and you will also be able to make your own reasoned choice in the end. We will start with some quick basic facts and then dive into the strengths and weaknesses of both frameworks. After that, we will take a look at some real app examples and finally talk about concrete questions you can ask to choose the right technology. And of course, recommendations when which approach works best. However, as Luke Pighetti said in his reaction to Theo's rant about Flutter, these are tools, not lifestyles. So please consider this a technical discussion and please stay away from pre-made assumptions and radical opinions.
What's that ominous glow in the distance?
First of all, because Expo is now the recommended framework for React Native, I might change React Native for Expo in this video every now and then. But both Flutter and Expo or React Native are open source frameworks for creating cross-platform apps. We're not going into a ton of technical details at this point, just really setting a baseline. So what is Flutter? It was introduced 2017 from Google. It's using Dart as the language and it follows a write once, run everywhere approach. What is Expo? It is a framework on top of React Native, which started in 2015 at Facebook and now Meta. It's using JavaScript and TypeScript and JSX, and it has a learn once, write everywhere approach. So you've most likely heard all the other general facts. So instead of reiterating all of them, we will talk about the really important stuff. But before with that, a quick disclaimer: I run an online school called galaxies.dev where I help developers learn React Native. But I've always been in love with cross-platform tools, starting with Cordova and Ionic in the past. I tried Flutter and React Native and App Studio and whatnot. So I will try to make this discussion as unbiased as possible. Alright, let's kick off this discussion on a positive note by talking about the strength first. So what are the most obvious things that make these frameworks great from the outside? For Flutter, this is definitely an epic developer experience. If you have tried it, if you come to Flutter and set up your first application, it just works really smooth and you instantly get something really cool in your application, which is also related to the UI that you get out of the box in Flutter applications. There are so many components you can drop into your application, which makes prototyping and building an app really easy and fast. On top of that, Dart is a language that's actually pretty cool. It has null safety and there's a testing framework integrated, so Dart isn't a bad language. It's just that it's not really used a whole lot, but if you're okay with using Dart, then it's a good language and probably people gonna like it more than JavaScript. On top of that, Flutter applications usually have a good performance. We're gonna get more into performance and the nuances here and there, but overall you're gonna see that usually Flutter apps might perform a bit better in some statistics. Expo, on the other hand, makes it really easy to get started because pretty much every React web developer can build React Native apps in a matter of like hours.
That was easy.
On top of that, you get real native feeling, more on native stuff later, and you can easily integrate native modules and all the platform APIs within React Native applications. On top of that, finding developers for React Native should be an easy task because every React web developer can quickly upskill into that position, and on top you get cool things like code push, which allows you to update your application without going through the App Store process, and the React community is just epic. Big players like Meta or Shopify are actively contributing to different packages and therefore help pushing React Native forward. Okay, so all of this sounds really good, Simon, but what really does suck about Flutter and Expo? Okay, let's talk about some weaknesses now. Let's begin with Flutter. First of all, you're gonna see people complain a lot about the widget trees. Everything in Flutter is a widget and your code can get really messy if you don't know what you do. Yes, you can split this up, but overall in many applications this looks really horrible. Then we got stuff like non-standard API interaction. Yes, you can use the camera and most of the native stuff, but if you want to do 3D or AR stuff with Flutter, then you're gonna have a really hard time. On top of that, web canvas rendering with Flutter, are you serious? Do we even have to talk about that? Flutter for the web is just something you really don't want to do. We've spoken of the good community in React Native. Well, there are packages for Flutter, but there's really a limited number of third-party libraries available, and it might be hard to find the right package, and if it's not there, good luck, you're on your own. One thing I found online was about non-traditional API interaction with Flutter. There was a nice quote: "God help you if you decide to use a Flutter front end with anything like TRPC or GraphQL. It's just a living, breathing nightmare." I can't confirm this exactly, but I agree that Flutter is built so you use something like your own API, a standard REST API or Firebase with it. Also, if you look at comparison, you're gonna find less jobs for Flutter. So if you're interested in getting a job, that might be a key argument. The community is smaller and Dart is really only used for Flutter. I don't know of anyone else using Dart on the server. Are you serious? I haven't seen that before. And of course, Google is behind Flutter and Dart. So we all know Google's history of deprecating things. And last but certainly not least, Flutter is not native. We could probably make a whole video on the topic that Flutter is not native, but you can usually spot Flutter applications. They just draw pixel perfect animations and stuff on the screen, but they are not embracing the native platforms. That is an important distinction here between Flutter and React Native. So if you're using Flutter, it doesn't take advantage of all the things that the Android engineers and the Apple engineers have done over the last like 10 or 15 years. I know Flutter has great performance, and with Impeller, which improves the rendering, especially on iOS, I think at the moment, I think it's not on Android yet, it will use more of the GPU to enhance that stuff, but still, again, it is not native. Weaknesses of Expo? Of course there are weaknesses. There is no UI out of the box. There are like no components. You probably got like a button and maybe an unstyled label, but that's it. So if you want to build React Native applications, you have to do a lot of styling or find some component library, but that's once again another story. Then also the learning curve seems to be a bit harder. So there's more to learn initially about React Native and how to build your applications. Then there are a lot of problems related to the general problems of web development, kind of like there's decision fatigue of all the packages. There are abandoned third-party packages. You find something, then you see the last commit from 5 years ago and you know, oh shit, I'm on my own here. And all this stuff just leads sometimes to confusion and just spending a whole day on like making no progress at all. Then in the past we also had performance limitations due to the bridge in React Native applications. So communicating between JavaScript and your native code was through a bridge, and there was always a bottleneck. This is going to get better with the new architecture coming soon to React Native and JSI. But still, there might be some limitations, and especially for all the applications, these limitations will still exist. Some other general problems are just debugging with React Native is absolutely no fun, and you're gonna see this in a lot of statistics. People hate updates to applications, although Expo is making this a lot better. But overall, you're just gonna experience the pain of modern web projects. As I said, with all the different packages, with abandoned packages, and also it's evolving at rapid speed, so you might be 5-10 versions behind if you don't watch out for updating your application, and then we come back to updating is challenging. Okay, these were some general strengths and weaknesses of both Flutter and Expo, but I have a note that these things can actually be good and bad at the same time. So how's that possible? Well, take a look at the freedom of choice in React Native projects. Many people value this. People use Linux over Windows or Mac because they want freedom. But on the other hand, some people want guidance. So having this freedom in React projects is a good thing, but can also be seen as a bad thing. Same for rendering to native components. If you use a button with React Native, it will render to the iOS native button and the Android native button. But do you really want that? Is that a good thing in your project, or might it be a bad thing? So you have to consider these things. Same is true for Flutter. Flutter applications look exactly the same on Android and iOS. That could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, depending on what you actually want. Or that Flutter is really opinionated. Maybe this is cool because it's giving your project a structure, or maybe you feel limited by that opinion. So you see, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, but we're gonna talk more about some guidelines. Let's look actually at some example applications. If you want to try out some Flutter applications, I highly recommend you check out the showcase of the Flutter page. You're gonna find some applications using Flutter and of course also some showcases. It was really cool to see Supercell using this for their internal platform, so not for all the Supercell games, but this internal platform was developed with Flutter. I'm a big fan of Clash of Clans, so yeah, that's pretty cool to see. But on the other hand, the best thing might be to actually check out an application. So I actually downloaded this My BMW app. I don't own a BMW, so I can't use it. Let me just click one thing, discover app benefits. So if you now notice something that felt off, then you might actually favor React Native. If you didn't feel something bad, then okay, it's cool. But usually, as an iOS user, I will feel that this transition doesn't feel native at all to me. But they're actually pretty good applications. For example, this is the Wondrous application, and I think this is an epic application. You see all the things going on here, the transitions. This looks really good, and this is a lot better experience. It is very far from a traditional native application because there's so many special things going on, and it is really performant in all the things going on in this application. So check this out as a great showcase for Flutter. On the other hand, you can check out a lot of applications built with Expos. So here are a lot of stories about companies using Expo, and of course also there's the React Native showcase where apps listed using React Native. You're gonna find a lot of big names in here. And finally, Evan Bacon did put together a nice list of apps using Expo in OSS in 2024. Things like Discord, Coinbase, NFL. Huge applications are built using either React Native or both React Native and Expo. I also made a video about all the best applications using this, so you can check this out. Once again, let's take a look at an actual application. So this here is the, this should be the Tesla application. I don't own a Tesla, but this application shows you all the things. It has really great snappy performance. Whenever I click something, it just works. I can play around, it is instantly, and this is the sort of stuff that you can build with React Native. Alright, so until now we've seen a lot about the basic facts, we've seen some strengths and some weaknesses for both Flutter and Expo, and we've also seen some app examples. Now, let's get even more practical. Do you have previous React or Dart knowledge? That is a nice indicator. If for some reason you have Dart knowledge, you might favor Flutter. If you already have a lot of React libraries built internally, then React Native is the logical choice. Do you want to access native platform APIs directly? In that case, go with Expo. The reason is simple. With Flutter, yes, you can use some of the native APIs where Flutter has built a wrapper around this, but if you want anything beyond that, then with Expo, you can easily drill down onto that level and access native APIs directly yourself. Do you want a pixel perfect design across multiple platforms? Then go with Flutter. With React Native, it renders to native components, but with Flutter, you can make sure that your brand and app experience looks exactly the same on all platforms, because Flutter is using this Sky rendering engine, or Impeller now on iOS, which draws exactly pixels on a canvas, so you can make sure it looks the same across all platforms. Do you want a web version of your application? As said before, the output of Flutter Web is really a joke and you don't want to use that, but with Expo Router and all things coming for universal applications, Web is a first-class citizen in React Native applications today. Do you want to prototype really fast? Then go with Flutter. As said at the beginning, Flutter comes with tons of UI components out of the box. So if you're just getting started, you can throw in some stuff, and in a matter of like 2 or 3 hours, you're gonna have a really good prototype of your application. Whereas with Expo and React Native, you're usually lacking these UI components. Do you wanna use code push? Then use Expo. For Flutter applications, there's actually no such thing as code push because these binaries work differently. With React Native and Expo, you can simply replace the JavaScript part of your bundle over the air and update your applications without waiting for Apple or Google to review your application. Do you plan to have a team of developers? Then use Expo. You're gonna have a lot easier time finding React developers or React Native developers than if you're looking to build up a team of Dart and Flutter developers. Do you want the best performance? Then Flutter might be your choice. Although React Native is very close up, especially with the new architecture and removing that bridge bottleneck, it's gonna be probably the same. However, in some statistics, you're gonna see Flutter at the top. And if you really care about like getting the last bit of performance of your application, then maybe just go for a native application instead. Do you want an ecosystem of tools to create, review, publish, submit your application? Then go with Expo. Expo has the application services, EAS, which make it incredibly easy to just push an update and then your app will be built in the cloud, submitted to Apple and Google, and you can directly release it with basically just a click. On top of that, things like Expo Atlas, reviewing PRs, and directly putting an application from your colleague on your phone is just amazing with Expo. So Expo is really focused on iteration speed and makes this part a whole lot easier. Do you want a future-safe technology with an active community? Then go with Expo. As said before, players like Meta, Amazon, Shopify, and many more contribute actively to different things like React Native for Mac, React Native Windows. So if you want to bet on a reliable technology where big players are involved, then React Native and Expo are your choices. Because with Flutter, if Google abandons Flutter for some reason at some point, you're gonna be pretty much on your own. The community is great, but it's not as active as the React Native community. Alright, so these questions should already point you somewhat in the right direction, but let's get even more precise with some guidelines. So you should pick Expo when you already have React experience or code in your company. When you want to build a web and a mobile application from the same code base. When you want to use native platform APIs and components. When you want to build full stack applications with the same technology on the API side. When you want to access the latest native platform APIs that Google and Android release. When you plan to work with different APIs like TRPC or GraphQL. And when you need code push in your application. You should pick Flutter when you already have Dart knowledge or developers in your company. You want to prototype very fast. You want to build more custom app experiences, probably even closer to games. You want the exact same UI on all the platform where your app runs. You want to also focus on desktop or especially embedded devices. Alright, so let's wrap it up with some final thoughts about the future. So what does the future hold for Expo and Flutter? Will one framework dominate and win like most videos and articles make you think? The statistics might make it look like Flutter is currently more popular, but React still dominates the market, especially in Western countries, and companies just reuse their code and skills. And many of these companies have over the last years developed their websites with React, so traditionally they will go for React Native over the next time. On the other hand, you see that Flutter is really popular in countries like India, and I talked to people from there and they told me that Google invests a lot into education in countries like India. So it's just natural that the Flutter adoption is a lot higher there compared to other countries. Most likely, both will simply continue to coexist and cater different markets. As we've outlined before, there are a lot of things for Expo, there are a lot of things for Flutter, so you can select which fits your situation best. The future for Expo looks really great. React Native is powered by the community, players like Meta, Microsoft, Shopify, Netflix, Sony, they all contribute, and React Native is heating for version 1 maybe, because we're actually still not on version 1. But overall, we're just gonna have a better architecture, no more bridge, no more bottleneck, and I think developing apps, cross-platform apps with React Native will be sort of a standard in the future. On the other hand, Flutter brings out Impeller for iOS. I don't know if this is also coming to Android for improved rendering, but of course, they will continue to build out their performance gains on these platforms. However, Flutter is also really strong on embedded devices, so probably going to see more Flutter or Dart target these devices in the future, and they of course have Google in the background, so whether it be the Gemini API or things like Firebase that you can easily plug into your application, they will probably also double down on all the things that you can embed with Google in Flutter applications a lot easier. But one quote that made me think about Flutter was that Flutter has little to zero backing beyond Google. If Google dropped it tomorrow, it would die very quickly. I don't know if this is really the case, but it paints a very dark picture of someday where Google just thinks, we don't need this Flutter thing anymore. I don't see this day coming anytime soon because they're using it in a lot of their internal tools like Google Pay or whatnot, so this day might be far off in the future. But both Expo and Flutter have a bright future. I think both communities can actually learn from the other. Things that Flutter made great are coming to React Native, for example. React Native has Skia, and the rendering can be used to draw on there. William Candillon did a great job in bringing Skia to React Native. And on the other hand, maybe Flutter will have code push one day if they figure this out, or they adopt some other patterns from the React Native world to render components in a better way. But overall, I just think that both will simply invest into the areas where they shine the most. So of course, all of this comes down to picking the right tool for the right job. And I hope this video gave you enough input to make your own best possible choice based on the strengths and the weaknesses and the app examples that we've seen, and try to make this as unbiased as possible from someone running a React Native online school. However, I generally think that there's only a fraction of applications where Flutter really makes sense. And I think for most normal applications, you are far better off with using Expo. There was a great quote that I found that said, developers use Flutter, companies use Expo. And I feel there's a truth in this. If you go through YouTube, and I did a lot of research, you're gonna find a lot of comments pro Flutter and people screaming, Flutter is the future, the trend is your friend, everything is great about it. But if you look at the reality, if you look at the job market, if you look at big companies, they are all using Expo and React Native. Yes, there's some exceptions. If you're a solo developer or an agency, you can build really shiny applications with Flutter, but overall for me, the upsides of React Native just dominate. And we got the active, vibrant community behind Expo and React Native that's just making it feel like you're at home and it's just fun to work with React Native. Yes, there are things like debugging that maybe suck, but these can be improved in the future, but the foundation of React Native and Expo is, to me, a lot more enticing than what Flutter does with its pixel-perfect rendering. So definitely make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about Expo and React Native, and of course check out my pro courses on galaxies.dev to learn and ship apps faster. Oh, and if we want to see something more practical, I will pin a video up here on some companies using React Native for their applications. So go check that out, and I will catch you in the next one. So until then, happy coding, Simon.